You are listening to Reform Thinking,
Yeah.
and this is your deep dive. So how do we balance our deepest convictions with, well, all the demands the world throws at us? What do you do when what Caesar asks, what the government or society requires, seems to really clash with what God requires?
Yeah, it's not a new question, is it?
Not at all. It's something Christians have wrestled with for centuries, really, from the very beginning right up to today.
Yeah.
And it still feels very relevant, very weighty for us.
Definitely.
Welcome to your deep dive. What we try to do here is take your sources, your notes, all that information, and, well, distill it.
Yeah.
We want to offer some clarity, help cut through the noise, and get to the core truths.
Mm-hmm.
And for this deep dive, we're unpacking a really fascinating discussion around Christian allegiance, our civic duties, and even sometimes the idea of faithful disobedience.
Right. We're looking at some key teachings, especially from Jesus, about how believers relate to earthly authorities.
So what are our main sources today?
Well, our main guide comes from how people have understood Jesus's commands, particularly that really key passage in Matthew 22, the one about taxes.
Render unto Caesar.
Yeah, exactly, that one. But also other related bits from the Bible that fill out the picture. The material we've got unpacks how our fundamental loyalty to Jesus Christ shapes how we deal with governing structures.
Okay.
It looks at times when submission is right, but also, just as crucially, times when resistance actually becomes the faithful thing to do.
So this deep dive, it's really designed for you listening in. We hope it brings some clarity, maybe some confidence in figuring out how to live your faith in what's often a pretty complicated world.
Yeah, navigating those tensions.
You should get a richer sense of what it means to be a citizen of two kingdoms, figuring out when to obey earthly powers and when, respectfully, you might need to resist, always keeping that ultimate loyalty to God front and center.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's set the scene. Matthew chapter 22. Can you paint a picture for us? What's happening here?
Right, so picture Jerusalem. It's buzzing, lots of religious, political tension in the air. Jesus's public ministry is really peaking.
High profile.
Very high profile. And you've got these groups, the Pharisees, known for being very strict on the law and, well, not fans of Roman rule at all.
Definitely not.
And then you have the Herodians. They're more of a political group, kind of aligned with Herod, who was appointed by Rome.
Strange bedfellows, the Pharisees and Herodians.
Very strange. Usually rivals. But here, they team up. They have this one malicious goal: trap Jesus, catch him out in his own words.
So it's a setup.
Absolutely a setup. They send their disciples, along with these Herodians, to approach Jesus, and they start with flattery, right? Teacher, we know you are true, trying to butter him up.
Classic tactic.
Yeah. And then comes the question. It's not genuine curiosity. It's a snare. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?
And that question was incredibly dangerous, wasn't it? Like a two-edged sword.
Precisely. A real catch-22.
Because if he says, yes, pay the tax, what happens?
Well, he alienates loads of Jewish people. They hated that Roman poll tax. It wasn't just money. It felt like collaborating with occupiers, a symbol of their subjugation. A yes makes him look like a Roman stooge.
Okay, so that's one edge. What about the other? If he says no?
No. If he says no, don't pay, then he's immediately an enemy of Rome. That's sedition, rebellion that can mean arrest, trial, even crucifixion.
So either way, they think they've got him. He either loses the support of the people or he gets handed over to the Roman authorities.
Seems like a perfect trap, no way out.
But Jesus, he sees right through it, doesn't he? He knows their hearts, their ill will.
Mm-hmm. He calls them out immediately. You hypocrites. He knows it's a test.
And then he does something interesting. He doesn't just answer. He asks for something.
Right. He says, show me the coin for the tax. They bring him a denarius.
And this coin, the denarius, that's significant too, isn't it? It wasn't just any old coin.
Not at all. This is crucial. The denarius at the time typically had Emperor Tiberius's image on it. And an inscription something like, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus.
Son of the divine Augustus. Wow. So for many Jews, that's a huge problem.
Huge. First, the graven image violates the commandments. Second, the inscription itself claims Caesar is divine, or son of a god. That's blasphemy for anyone believing in the one true God.
So even just carrying the coin, let alone paying taxes with it.
It was deeply offensive to many. So when Jesus asks them to produce the coin, they have to pull out this symbol of Roman power and idolatry.
He turns it back on them. They have to handle the very thing causing the controversy.
Exactly. It's a masterful move before he even answers the question directly.
So, show him the coin. He holds it up. this symbol of Roman rule, Roman claims to divinity,
Yeah.
and asks.
He asks simply, whose likeness and inscription is this?
And they have to say it.
They have to say Caesar's.
And then comes that famous line.
Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's.
And to God, the things that are God's.
And that response, it just resonates down through history.
It really does. And like you said, it's so much more than just, tax advice. It really sets a framework, doesn't it, for how Christians are supposed to interact with earthly powers.
Absolutely. It establishes this fundamental distinction, this guiding principle.
So let's unpack that principle more, this idea of allegiance. What's the foundation here?
The absolute foundation, the core principle that comes out of this and other teachings is that all our earthly loyalties to family, to nation, to rulers, they are all secondary. They're subordinate to and shaped by our ultimate loyalty to Jesus Christ as King.
King of Kings.
King of Kings. Any other loyalty we have is only permitted, only valid, insofar as it fits under that supreme bond to Jesus. That's the starting point for a believer in relating to anything else, including the government.
Okay, so loyalty to Jesus is paramount. But the sources also say something about earthly authority itself, right? That Caesar, the government, has a place.
Yeah. Yes, that's the other side of the coin, if you will. Caesar, meaning earthly governing structures, holds authority because God, in his providence, has designed it that way.
Not that every ruler is good or every law is just, but the structure of governance itself has a divine warrant.
Exactly. God institutes government for order, to restrain evil, to promote a measure of peace in a fallen world. So there's a general expectation for us to, follow the laws, to respect the structures. That's where proper civic engagement comes from.
And this feels like a really important, but that authority isn't absolute, is it?
Not even close. That's the critical counterpoint. While government authority is from God, governments themselves are made up of sinful humans, and they often misuse or distort that God-given authority.
So when Caesar oversteps,
that's where render to God the things that are God's kicks in with full force. If Caesar commands something God forbids, like idolatry, injustice, denying Christ, or if Caesar claims a lordship that belongs only to Jesus.
Like saying Caesar is Lord.
Precisely. If Caesar demands worship or ultimate allegiance, believers simply cannot comply. They must refuse, because only Jesus is Lord.
And this is where conflict can arise.
Inevitably. Jesus knew this. He warned his disciples it would happen.
Yeah, you mentioned those warnings earlier. Can you remind us what he said? It sounds pretty stark.
It is stark. Think about Luke 21. Jesus tells his disciples, "They will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake." He even says, "Some of you they will put to death."
Wow. That's intense.
It is. And those warnings only really make sense if Jesus is telling them, implicitly or explicitly, that there will be times when they cannot give Caesar what Caesar demands. Their loyalty to God will put them at odds with earthly power.
It sets up that potential clash.
Yeah.
Loyalty to God limits loyalty to Caesar.
Exactly. It puts a clear boundary on Caesar's claims.
And Jesus didn't just warn about this, did he? Didn't he model this kind of noncompliance himself?
He absolutely did. The sources point this out clearly. Think about his trials. When Herod questioned him, Luke tells us Jesus gave him no answer.
Silence.
Silence is resistance. Same with Pilate in Mark's account. Pilate was amazed Jesus wouldn't defend himself against the charges. And even before the high priest, Matthew tells us Jesus was initially silent when challenged under oath, only speaking when necessary to affirm his divine identity, which itself was an act against their misuse of authority.
So these weren't just passive moments. They were deliberate choices not to comply when compliance would have compromised God's will or truth.
Right. He demonstrated that there are times when faithful resistance, a kind of civic noncompliance, is the right response. It's baked into his own life and teaching.
Okay, let's shift slightly then. We've talked about the limits. Let's go back to the rendering, the paying taxes, the obeying part. There's this intriguing idea in the material about how even proper submission actually, in a way, dethrones Caesar. Can you explain that? It sounds paradoxical.
It does sound paradoxical, but it's quite profound. The idea is this. When a Christian obeys Caesar, pays the tax, follows a just law, why are they doing it?
Well, because Jesus said to. Render to Caesar.
Exactly. They obey Caesar not because Caesar is the ultimate authority, not because Caesar is inherently worthy of that obedience in himself, but because Jesus, their true Lord, commands it.
So the motivation is key.
Motivation is everything here. The act might look like simple compliance on the outside, but the inner reason, the ultimate allegiance, is directed towards Jesus. This transforms the act. It becomes an expression of Jesus' supreme rule over Caesar.
So by obeying Caesar for Jesus' sake, you're actually saying Jesus is Lord, not Caesar.
Precisely. You are acknowledging Caesar's God-given, limited authority, but denying any claim he might have to ultimate authority or divinity. It strips Caesar of those pretensions.
That's why the source material calls it potentially seditious toward rulers with pretensions of deity. Not seditious in a violent overthrow the government way,
But seditious in the spiritual sense. It undermines the ruler's claim to be ultimate. By obeying the earthly ruler because the heavenly king says so, you're constantly pointing away from the earthly ruler to the true king. It's a quiet but powerful statement.
that reframes the whole act of paying taxes or following laws. It's not just civic duty, it's an act of discipleship.
Yes, you're essentially serving Jesus by serving Caesar appropriately. You're acknowledging that Caesar himself and his government ultimately belong to God and are under Christ's authority.
Is there an example of this kind of thinking in Jesus' ministry?
There is, actually. The temple tax incident in Matthew 17 is a great illustration.
Okay, remind us of that story.
So collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax, this was a Jewish tax for the temple upkeep, not Roman.
Yeah.
They asked Peter, does your teacher not pay the temple tax?
And Peter says,
Peter says yes, maybe a bit quickly. But then Jesus pulls Peter aside and asks him, what do you think, Simon? From whom do earthly kings collect taxes? From their own sons or from others?
and Peter says, from others.
Right. So Jesus says, then the sons are free. His point is, as the Son of God, whose Father owns the temple, technically he and his followers, the children of the kingdom, are exempt. They shouldn't have to pay a tax for their own Father's house.
So they're free from the obligation, in principle.
In principle, yes. They have that freedom as children of the king. But then Jesus says the crucial thing. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook. And he tells Peter how to miraculously find a coin in a fish's mouth to pay the tax for both of them.
Not to give offense, that's the key reason he pays.
That's the stated reason. It wasn't because the collectors had an absolute right to demand it from him, the son. It was a choice made out of wisdom, freedom, and love to avoid creating an unnecessary stumbling block for others.
Okay, so how does that apply back to Caesar's tax?
Well, the principle is similar. God owns Caesar. God owns the whole government. Believers are God's children, the sons who are ultimately free. Caesar's demand for taxes isn't absolute in itself based on his ultimate authority.
But we pay anyway.
We pay anyway. Why? Because our Father, God, through Jesus, bids us render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. We do it out of obedience to God for the sake of order, and often, like with the temple tax, to avoid unnecessary offense and maintain our witness. It shows how God's ultimate ownership guides even our submission.
So submission isn't based on Caesar's inherent right, but on God's command and wisdom for living in this world.
Exactly. It's God-directed submission, which is fundamentally different from Caesar worship.
Okay, that covers obedience and submission.
Yeah.
Now, let's tackle the harder part. Disobedience. When is it necessary, and how is it shaped by this same allegiance to Jesus?
Right. This is where things get really challenging. But the principle remains. Even when disobedience is necessary, it's still shaped by Jesus' lordship, even over Caesar's flawed or distorted authority. It's not about anarchy or just doing what we want.
It's principled resistance rooted in all.
It's rooted in Jesus' commands, particularly those about love, servanthood, and even care for enemies. Christian disobedience isn't driven by self-interest, revenge, personal safety, or protecting our stuff. The sources emphasize this.
So it's not about, I don't like this law, or this is inconvenient for me.
No, it's supposed to free us from worrying about our own comfort or possessions. Instead, it should spring from a desire to live for others, protecting the oppressed, yes, but somehow, incredibly, also seeking the good of the oppressor, loving the persecuted and the persecutor.
That sounds incredibly difficult. How does that connect with Jesus' teachings like turn the other cheek? Because that sounds very passive.
Yes, the tension in Matthew 5. It's a real point of discussion.
Yeah.
On one side, verses 38-42 talk about not resisting evil, turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, giving your cloak to. That sounds like absolute non-resistance, right? Willingness to suffer personally.
It does. But then right after that,
Right after, verses 43-48 talk about active love. Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, seek their good actively like God sends rain on everyone. That sounds like positive action, not just passive acceptance.
so which is it? Is passive compliance always the most loving action? Especially if, say, someone else is being harmed. Can you just turn their cheek, metaphorically speaking?
That's the crucial question. And the understanding from the sources is that, true, Christ-like love has to weigh justice and mercy for everyone involved. Sometimes passive compliance, especially when it enables repeated harm to others, isn't love. It might actually be cowardice or enabling sin.
So love itself might demand resistance when?
Love compels resistance when, for example, someone else is being systematically harmed, not just you personally. Or critically, when obeying Caesar's command would make you an active participant in evil.
Can you give an example of that?
The sources use strong examples, like, would you give your coat to someone if you knew they were going to use it immediately to strangle a baby? Or would you just go along with orders that clearly support bloodshed or gross injustice?
No, of course not. Those seem like clear lines.
They're intended as flashpoints, moments where love for God and neighbor compels you to say no, perhaps even actively intervene, moving beyond purely passive non-resistance. Think of Jesus clearing the temple that wasn't passive acceptance of wrongdoing. It was active, zealous love for God's house and righteous anger against exploitation.
Okay, so there are times when disobedience is required by love, but what should that disobedience look like? What's the character, the tone?
This is absolutely key. The demeanor of Christian resistance should be the polar opposite of, say, loud, angry, destructive protest driven by hate or pride.
Why?
Because we're followers of the crucified Christ, people of the cross, as the sources put it. We remember Jesus willingly suffered to save his enemies. We're also forgiven sinners. That reality leaves no room for arrogance or self-righteousness in our stance against injustice.
So humility is essential.
Absolutely. Before considering disobedience, the call is to self-examination. Remove the log from your own eye first. Acknowledge our own sin, our own complicity, perhaps. This should lead to humility, maybe even sorrow or tears, even when taking a stand.
It softens the anger.
It transforms indignation into something different. A humble, quiet, but unshakable no. The focus isn't just winning or changing a law, though that might be a goal. The deeper contest is becoming the kind of people Jesus wants us to be, people shaped by humility, love, and faithfulness, even in resistance.
That's a very different picture of protest or disobedience than we often see.
It is. It's fundamentally shaped by the cross and resurrection.
So wrapping this up then, this deep dive into render unto Caesar, what's the main takeaway?
The main takeaway is that this command from Jesus isn't just about taxes. It fundamentally establishes God's supreme rule, Christ's lordship, over everything, including all earthly powers. It gives a basis for obeying earthly authorities, yes, but it also clearly limits that obedience and shapes how we should live under those authorities.
Both obedience and disobedience are framed by loyalty to Jesus.
Exactly. Our loyalty to earthly powers is warranted, limited, and shaped by our ultimate loyalty to him.
And understanding this, it frees us, doesn't it, to live in this world but as citizens of another kingdom.
Precisely. It means we don't have to just escape the world, nor do we just blindly conform to it. We live out the difference that King Jesus makes in every relationship, including our relationship with the state.
Living in that creative tension.
Living faithfully within it.
So maybe a final thought for you listening.
What might it look like in your own life, your own context, to embody that humble, quiet, yet unshakable no when necessary? A resistance rooted not in self-interest, but in love for God and others, always holding firm to Jesus as your ultimate Lord. Something to consider.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration has offered some clarifying insight as you navigate these important questions. Until next time, keep seeking to know and live by God's truth.